Hello everyone, my name is Preston Dennett, and welcome to a new episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. I call this episode A Gray Alien Named Sen. This is a very unusual and extensive case of UFO contact involving a lady I will call Julia. That's not her real name. She prefers to remain anonymous. Julia grew up in Prunedale, California, and had a lot of unusual and very scary experiences throughout her childhood that she did not understand. She tried to explain it to her parents. Her parents were very strict and not helpful. And by age 19, she was at the end of her rope, so she decided she was just going to leave home. And she did, and she moved as far away from California as she could get, all the way to the east coast of the United States, and started to rebuild her life. She found a place to live. She got a job. She started her own business, started working as a writer. She found friends. She met her boyfriend, who would later become her husband, and just started nurturing and rebuilding her life. And she started to look back on her childhood to figure out what had gone wrong. She knew it wasn't childhood abuse. She knew it wasn't sleep paralysis. And the more she looked into it, she realized it was probably aliens. And this scared her very badly, so she decided to just drop the subject, not think about it, and move on with her life. And then in 2011, everything changed. She had a sudden and very strong impulse to move back to California. And as she says, I honestly can't tell you why I felt like I was being directed to do this. So she and her boyfriend just up and moved to Pacific Grove, California. And this is when her life started to get really strange again. She started having these weird harmonic ringing sounds in her ear, in her right ear. It was like tinnitus, but it didn't appear to be tinnitus. As Julia says, I thought maybe there was an insect that had gotten into my ear because I could hear it moving around. I could feel something digging into my skin. It was making this harmonic vibration. It was just terrible. So I went to the doctor. He looked in my ear and he says, there's nothing in there. So that was like torture to me because he could not help me. So Julia thought to herself, well, perhaps it is a bug. And if it's a bug, at some point it's got to die. But it didn't. This harmonic ringing continued. As she says, so I waited like 2 weeks, but I still heard these sounds, these harmonics, and the thing kept digging into my skin. This went on for 2 years. It was a nightmare. It was awful. It was so terrible. I thought I had tinnitus. I had to rule out all these things. I would take pictures of my ear. I tried everything, and the stupid thing wouldn't stop. Julia did notice something very strange with these ringing sounds. As she says, I noticed a pattern. These sounds happened so often, I started to notice the pattern. When I was physical with my husband, when we were kissing or experiencing certain types of behavior, like hugs or an emotional connection, it would start to make these loud humming noises. And I can't even begin to tell you how annoying it was. So Julia tried to move on with her life. She worked as a writer. Around this time, she noticed she could see people's auras and tell what was physically wrong with them. And she started giving aura health readings and was quite good at it. She had a lot of compliments. People were so happy with her, they would give her gifts. And meanwhile, she still suffered with this tinnitus. By 2013, she was really at the end of her rope with it. As she says, I finally got to the point where there was no explanation for this thing in my ear. There was nothing I could come up with. And at this point, she started to see weird orb-like objects over their home. This was in Pacific Grove, and she would look out the window or look outside and see these glowing orb-like objects. And after several of these sightings, she realized they were UFOs. And finally, one came low over the house, and on impulse, she ran outside and started screaming at it and said to it, Are you the ones that put this in my ear? Did you do this? It suddenly occurred to her that she might have an implant in her ear and that this problem was due to aliens. She got a real sinking feeling. She did not want to go there, but she really had no choice. As she says, I knew I wasn't crazy and that something was happening, but I just couldn't find any explanation. Then I started thinking aliens. So at this point, she decided she's going to have to face the subject. She's going to have to really dig into her childhood and figure out what happened. So she started looking back to her childhood, all the way back to as far as she could remember. And she started to really realize that, yes, this was probably something to do with aliens and the things that happened to her when she was a little girl and a teenager. And looking back, she saw that her first strange experiences occurred around age 5 or 6. When she was in her room, whenever she was feeling sad, these little colorful orbs would appear. They were really beautiful, small, glowing orbs with soft pastel colors, yellow, blue, green, pink, and they were really pretty, as she says. I thought they were fairies. I would talk to them, and they would float around my room. It was very comforting. Anytime I was sad or felt hurt or was crying, they would show up, and they would just overwhelm me with a feeling of peace. I didn't realize until later that it was a little weird. At some point, that stopped, and it was around age 6, really all the way up to age 19, so 13 years. She started to have really scary experiences in which her room would fill up with light and these figures would enter into the room. And this was very scary for her. As she says, what began happening is I started to get paralyzed at night. I would wake up and there would be lights coming into my bedroom, bright, bright lights. The whole room would be lit up and my body would be paralyzed. But my eyes could move. I would look around trying to see who was in the room with me, and I couldn't see any actual people, so I didn't know what that was. She did tell her parents, but again, her parents were very strict and not helpful. In fact, she got in trouble about this. So she was basically on her own, and these experiences just continued. As Julia says, the one thing I can say about the nighttime things that happened is they were very scary for me because I knew that the lights were not on because of something I had done. Somebody had turned lights on in my room. It was super traumatic, a combination of being preyed upon by whatever this was and then getting in trouble for it. I just remember it being a very, very dark period of my life. At this point, she was not connecting it to ETs at all. And she didn't connect it to ETs, even when she had a very dramatic UFO sighting at around age 9 or 10. She was outside on the balcony of her home in Prunedale, which overlooked this little valley, and this enormous classic silver flying saucer showed up. It was absolutely huge. As Julia says, it was humongous, and it was just hovering in my valley. It basically took up the entire width of the valley. It was so big, and it just sat there silently. It was a perfect dome with a perfect saucer shape, a slate gray like a Navy ship. It was a flying saucer. It was very close. I could see the details of it, little lines where the metal was a different color. It looked much like the same material you would make a Navy ship out of. The weird part of this whole experience was on the dome of this craft, there were giant block red letters spelling out USA. So this was very peculiar and really puzzled Julia. She didn't know what to make of it. But as she says, it was very large lettering. It took up one whole side of the dome itself. I watched it hover there for I have no idea how long, and then I went back inside and ate a sandwich. That doesn't sound normal to me. I should have run back inside screaming at my brothers. Oh my God, it's a UFO. I don't know why that happened. I literally just stood there and watched it, and then I ate some food. Julia did have 2 little brothers, but they were quite a bit younger than her, so she couldn't really talk to them about this experience. And she kind of basically forgot about it. She wonders now if this could have been some weird sort of screen memory, particularly the lettering. She doesn't know. All she knows is she has this memory of this gigantic flying saucer right outside her home. This was during the day. So this was a very dramatic sighting. And meanwhile, her nighttime experiences continued. And this went on all the way to age 19. As Julia says, I couldn't close my eyes, and sometimes the light was just so bright, and I was so afraid to see the shadows materialize. I could see them moving, but I just knew in my heart that I didn't want to see them materialize, so I just kind of blacked them out. The one thing I did to protect myself is I would crawl inside. I would go catatonic and crawl inside my mind. I was so afraid of what was about to happen. The fear was so great that I was actually able to dissociate and leave my body, go inside and block everything out. My childhood was pretty difficult. My parents never believed me. They did not protect me. They did not care what was happening. So at that point, at age 19, she couldn't take it anymore, and that's when she moved to the East Coast and started to rebuild her life. And like I said earlier, she did look into her childhood at some point, and realizing it was aliens, she just did not have the strength or courage to face that at that time. As she says, I thought probably it was aliens, but I didn't want to look it up. I did not want to give it credence or energy in my life. So now she's back in Pacific Grove, California. She's seeing these orbs. She's hearing these weird harmonic ringings in her ear. And always when she's being intimate with her husband, hugging or kissing or making love, this is when these tones would really become prominent. And she did finally tell her husband that she thinks she's being visited by aliens. She told him about the orbs that are hovering over her house, this harmonic ringing. She had already told him about that. And he was very supportive and understanding, but wasn't really sure how to help her. At this point, they did get married. And it was very interesting because during their wedding ceremony, Julia saw weird orbs dancing around in the trees at the ceremony, weird colorful orbs, just like when she was a kid. And again, she felt somewhat comforted by them. And to her, it was sort of a good sign. At the same time, she still had a lot of fear surrounding what had happened to her in her childhood. And then these orbs continued to appear over their house at night. And one evening, Julia was sleeping in bed. They have a skylight right over their bed, and looking up, she saw a UFO hovering very low over her house, and she was unable to move. She felt paralyzed. As Julia says, there was a bright circle of light hovering over our bedroom. I saw this craft. I was awake, but I could not move my body. It didn't scare me. I was paralyzed, but I was looking up and I saw this craft. So that's all she remembers. She fell asleep, woke up the next morning, told her husband, and she went on the internet and started doing some research and was shocked when she found an image of what appeared to be the same exact object. As she says, and I quote, "It was just this circle of lights. It was the exact same craft. It had the exact same amount of lights. It looked like the same one." So events were definitely escalating, and it was a short time later when Julia had a very major event. She woke up one evening and heard this musical tone echoing throughout the house, and she started wandering around looking for it. As she says, the sound was like music, a beautiful strumming sound like a guitar. The music was kind of like following me around, and I realized it was coming from the implant in my ear. It was actually inside my ear, and I could hear it. It was just very strange. So the second I realized it was coming from the implant, there was a very, very bright light, like a flash of pretty purplish silver, but it completely, totally blinded me. So Julia was in the living room when this happened. She felt like she was being struck by a beam of light. She was unable to move, and this is when she started to see all these very pretty sort of sacred geometry-like shapes, triangles, squares, diamonds, moving at her in sort of a tunnel of light. And she felt herself being pulled into it. As Julia says, I started to feel myself being pulled through. I was fully experiencing it, and I knew exactly what they were doing. They were moving me, my body, through space and time. I was easily traveling through it, and I could feel somebody on the other end that was pulling me through this tunnel, like a metaphysical tunnel. I felt like I didn't have any arms or legs. I felt like my spirit was moving to meet my body on the other end. So all this is happening, and the next thing I knew, I was on an actual ship. I'm on a ship, and I'm surrounded by these glowing faces with large almond eyes. Julia was strangely calm, and looking around, she saw that she was in this small, rounded room, and there were about 8 or 9 gray aliens. As Julia says, it was a large group. They had pale white faces, big black eyes, round in the front with a pointed almond shape at the tip. They were 5 feet tall and very thin. And this room she was in was again rounded and quite small. As she says, it was like a nursery. The room was round. The bed that I was in was white, and it looked very simple. She could see that the wall of this craft was transparent, and looking through it, she could see the earth far below her. And it was quite some distance down there, so she realized she was pretty high up there in outer space. And this point, the Greys who were surrounding her handed her a baby, a hybrid baby or perhaps a gray alien baby. And she says the baby was just like them, white skin, big black eyes, almost Asian looking. The baby was in a little soft white blanket, and its little face was sticking out, and I held the baby in my arms and looked at the baby. They were all interested in what was happening. They were monitoring. They wanted to know if I felt anything for the baby. And Julia didn't. She felt neither attraction nor repulsion. Really, it was very much clinical. She had no real feelings about this baby at all. And as she says, when I felt nothing, I handed the baby back to them. And the next thing Julia knew, it was morning, and she was back in bed. And she says, I woke up in my bed, I looked down, and I had 3 large bleeding puncture wounds on my belly. I was covered in blood. So she woke her husband. They cleaned herself up. They were quite concerned about this event. It was very shocking. And then came even more shocking news. Julia was pregnant. They had been trying to get pregnant unsuccessfully, and now suddenly they were pregnant. But they did not feel like this was good news because both of them were convinced that this pregnancy had something to do with this onboard UFO encounter. As Julia says, I knew before I took the pregnancy test that it had something to do with that night. We were both traumatized. We thought that they had done something to my body, and possibly the pregnancy was from that experience. So it wasn't a joyful thing, and we weren't excited. I was really scared about what they were doing to me, and I was also scared that they were going to try and take the baby from me. And at this point, her experiences escalated even further. She started waking up and being completely paralyzed and unable to move. This was quite scary for her. and she would try to move and wake up, but she just couldn't. The only thing she could do was move her pinky finger. And so she told her husband, if you see me in the middle of the night moving my pinky finger, please wake me up, roll on top of me, do something to stop this experience from happening. And this turned out to work out really well. The husband would wake up feeling her moving her little finger, and he would quickly wake her up or roll over and lay on top of her, and this would stop the experience. So this seemed to work for a little while, but actually it just caused the experiences to escalate to a whole new level. As Julia says, she really started to fight them mentally at this point. She wanted to take control. She wanted these experiences to stop. As she says, it started to feel kind of like a battle at that point. That's the best way I can describe it. I felt like I was fighting. I didn't want to go along anymore. I didn't want to be a passenger in this experience. I really just wanted to say, I know what you're doing to me. Enough. Stop abducting me. If you want to abduct me, why don't you ask? I'll do it willingly. You don't have to kidnap me. You don't have to put me through that. So while all of this was going on, her husband continued to help her by waking her up and stop these experiences. And this is when the encounters moved to a whole new level. As Julia says, maybe a week or two went by and they couldn't pull me. So they showed up in my house in physical form. I was asleep. My husband woke up and he heard a sound at the doorway, and he saw this 3-foot-tall thing at the door. He blinked, and in that moment, it went from the door to the side of our bed. It happened so fast. He reached over to turn the light on, and he knocked the light over. It fell where this thing was standing, and when this light came on, it was gone. He woke Julia up and said, I just saw one. I saw an alien. And Julia said, oh my God, what did it look like? Her husband said it was pinkish gray and 3 feet tall. It was shortly after this experience that Julia had a miscarriage. As Julia says, I hate to say it, but I was happy because it didn't feel like a normal pregnancy to me. It felt like something else, like a stone. It was hard and uncomfortable. It just didn't feel like my baby. It was a scary pregnancy. So after that, I was really grateful. I feel bad to say that. So after this miscarriage, Julia's experiences came to a sudden end. No longer was she hearing these weird harmonic tones in her ear. She wasn't waking up paralyzed. There were no more UFOs over their house. No ETs coming in. No onboard experiences. Everything just stopped. As Julia says, the implant just went silent. I never heard it again. I never had another night of sleep paralysis either. All of it ended at the same time after that night. I felt like I failed their experiment because I fought back. And I thought, good, I'm a failure. They're probably not going to visit me. So by this point, she's in her mid-30s, and she feels like her experiences with ETs are completely over. And she and her husband decide that they're going to move back to the East Coast, which they did. And they were very happy. They got pregnant. They had their first child, a beautiful, healthy baby boy, and they got pregnant again. And Julia was about 7 months pregnant when she decided to go out shopping with her best friend. And on impulse, they saw this psychic tea leaf reader. And her friend says, let's go visit. Let's get a psychic reading. And Julia thought, okay, that'll be fun. Let's go and get a psychic reading. And Julia started getting her reading. The psychic filled up a teacup and started looking at the tea leaves. And as Julia says, the first thing she starts to talk about is aliens. She says, Oh, your cup is filling with flying saucers. Oh, look at these aliens over here. Julia's friend looked at her in surprise. Julia had never spoken about her past, so this was quite disconcerting to her. And the psychic told Julia, the aliens are still looking out for you. You think they are gone, but they are still in your life. They want you to know that you are not a victim. They cared about you from your childhood on, and they still care about you. They chose you for a reason. You were chosen for a reason. They want you to write about it. So that ultimately turned out to be why Julia contacted me later. But that really sort of threw her for a loop. She wondered if her experiences were going to ramp up again, but they didn't. She was just fine. But then one morning, this is still in just a short time later, she's about 7.5 months pregnant or so, and she's getting ready for a doctor appointment to check on her pregnancy. And on impulse, she decided to reach out telepathically to see if she could contact the gray alien baby that she had seen on the craft many years earlier. As Julia says, I don't know why, but I reached out to my child, the child I had held in the spaceship. I just reached out mentally, like a prayer. Are you there? Are you okay? I don't know anything about telepathy, but when I reached out, I found out that there was somebody on the other end of the line. I was super shocked, and I kind of didn't know how to really process it. So I just went with it, and I asked it questions. What's your name? She asked. And the being replied, Sen. In her mind, Julia could see this little gray E.T. She says he looked very cute, was very friendly, very benign, and she felt very strongly telepathically connected to him to the degree that she actually found herself inside this little ship with him and could see everything he was seeing, and he could see everything she was seeing. And this was the beginning of an hours-long conversation between Julia and this gray alien named Sen. And as Julia says, it was kind of like I was actually there with it. I was in the ship with it, and it was the same kind of ship. It was like a little round room, and you could see everything. There were no windows, and it was flying over this large body of water, and it was beautiful. So she could see through the walls, which were slightly transparent. And Julia asked, where are we? And instead of communicating with words, Sen began to show her mostly images. He showed her images and concepts and would occasionally speak with words as well. And as Julia says, he kind of showed me that this was its planet. He showed me a large tower. Julia asked, speaking out loud, what is the tower for? And Sen replied, the tower emanates the frequency of our planet. The ship I'm in can repulse that energy. And he sent her an image of the ship's control room and explained that the equipment was actually a frequency generator which emitted an anti-frequency of the planet, and that the waves repulsed each other. As Julia says, he was showing me how it worked, and it was beautiful. That's all I can say. The technology was just beautiful. He showed me how he could flip in his ship, and he did all this stuff. I felt no gravity at all. So he started doing all these loop-de-loops and flips and turning at right angles, and it was really exhilarating and quite fun. And after doing this, Julia asked him, are you my child? Are you the child I had on the ship? And Sen replied, no, I am not your child. You did not give birth to me. I've been given your DNA to evolve to where I am. I have your DNA in me. We are connected through our DNA. Julia had a lot of questions, and she started hammering them at Sen. And she says, why did you abduct me? Why have you been abducting me since I was a child? What is my implant? And Sen answered her questions, again using images and concepts and words. As Julia says, he allowed me to see that I had helped them, but that the reason they had not asked my permission was because they do not experience relationships in the way that I understand them. They have no concept of what it means to ask permission or to engender respect through emotional connection. So the gray showed Julia that he was sort of lacking in the strong emotions that humans have. As Julia says, he showed me what they needed. He showed me how they got to where they were with their own physiology. The radiation and long distances in space forced them to evolve into a different type of species where they couldn't have hormonal reactions. They took their hormones out of their DNA, and in doing so, they changed their DNA from the law of attraction to repulsion. We are important to them. We are a bridge to them, but it's more of a scientific thing. They love science so much. Their whole livelihood has become an experiment trying to get back what they lost. We are the bridge back to what they were. So Sen explained this to her in a lot of detail. Julia is very scientifically minded, and even so, a lot of this went over her head. But Sen basically explained exactly why she had been contacted and what their agenda was. As Julia says, Sen explained to me that his race used humans like me to try and bridge themselves back into the law of attraction. A long time ago, their species was like us. They were beautiful creatures that reproduced on a planet. They chose a life of exploration among the stars and began to experiment on themselves to create bodies better suited for space travel. They began the long process of eliminating the strands of DNA that existed in the law of attraction, hormones, and emotions. The vibrations and frequencies were changed using light therapy. This changed them physically into creatures that eventually became asexual. Once Sen's people stopped feeling the vibration and frequency of attraction, they began to stop feeling a connection to each other. Reproduction became uninteresting. Alone in space, they began to clone themselves. Some travel in space their whole lives without seeing another living being as they explore other places in the universe. The main difference in our physiology is humans are rooted through their bodies in material reality, and they, the Greys, are rooted in a frequency and vibrational reality. Their bodies are almost an unimportant side effect. But at some point, they realized they did not like this existence, or that this existence could leave them unable to evolve any further in the material world. As explorers, they found Earth to be filled with beings existing in the law of attraction, and people like me, with an excessive amount of this vibration, can help them bridge back the gap within themselves so they can once again settle on a planet and reproduce again naturally, which is the first step for the law of attraction. So this was quite a bit of detail, and at this point Julia asked Sen, "Do you guys want to live on Earth?" And Sen replied, "No, we don't want Earth. It is filled with people already. There are many empty planets like it." As Julia says, they have no desire to live on our planet, a planet filled with messy human beings. I sent him the image and the feelings I was experiencing with my belly full of child, my toddler lying next to me. It was repulsive to him in that it was messy. Julia was amazed to be so mentally connected to Sen, and she began to pick up more information. As Julia says, when I saw into his mind, I saw the scope of his race. I would say that there are not very many of them. They're not in one place. They don't have a city. As they lost their attraction to each other, they split out farther and farther. And Sen said that yes, it was true. They disliked associating with humans because we are so emotional and so physical and abrasive. as he told her, humans are difficult to communicate with because you are so emotional. And he added, however, that this was the aspect of humans that they were particularly interested in and trying to reintegrate back into their own race. As Julia says, this conversation between us was a marriage of information. I felt somewhat stupid and emotional, and he felt distant and logical. So they continued to discuss a lot of scientific subjects and genetics and things like this. As Julia says, he showed me that he was taking my DNA and was adding it to their own DNA in hopes that they would be able to repair the damage that they had caused in their own DNA so that they could come back to being able to reproduce, and that then they could repopulate a planet again. It's really weird, but he was showing me that their DNA and our DNA are capable of mixing because our DNA has so much junk. He said we are like a donor for other creatures that are trying to reverse their DNA damage and get back their DNA. Space, the radiation and the frequencies, does a lot of damage to DNA. It doesn't do damage to their bodies, the way their bodies are, but once they get to a planet, then they have problems. They can't reproduce. The clones they create of themselves are not capable of reproducing either. He was showing me that they want to reproduce and live on a planet, and that's what their goal was for taking my DNA. As Julia learned from Sen, we truly don't understand why it makes us special, but in Sen's mind, there's a pendulum. On one side are the evolved beings that have eliminated human emotions but are left with a shadow of physiology. On the other side, the physiology is powerful, but the chaos of that frequency is overwhelming. There are other ways to exist, all taking place in evolutions of frequency and vibrations around the universe. It's a matter of finding the perfect frequency. At this point, Julia asked Sen about this implant and the weird tones in her ear. And Sen told her, it's not us. It's you. It's the sound of your hormonal frequencies. It is your sound, and we are mapping that frequency. As Julia says, he explained that the implant in my ear was a recording device that emitted and mapped the vibrations made by my hormonal and emotional responses to attraction. This sound in my ear was actually me, my vibrations. They mapped this vibration in order to replace this frequency into their own DNA. The baby I held on the ship had pieces of me, but mostly they used vibrations that they had recorded into its DNA. And when they handed me the baby, they wanted to see my reaction to it, whether it held the law of attraction or repulsion. So they talked some more, and as Julia says, Sen is an explorer. They all are, but they're trying to settle down. When we think of settling down, we think of having kids. For them, it's like rebuilding an entire civilization on a planet. Their whole civilization has lived among the stars in the universe. And Sen wanted to keep talking, but at this point the conversation had gone on for quite some time, and Julia was late for her appointment. And she told Sen, I have to go. Stop talking, I have to go. And finally she just broke off the connection. But she felt this tremendous sense of relief. All her fear left her. She finally understood why she was being contacted. And while she still, felt some fear from her childhood experiences and some sense of violation, now she understood. The fear was gone, and she did not feel like this was a bad experience. And in fact, she found it really quite interesting. And at this point, all her fears had left her. She felt like her experiences were completely over, and she was happy to just move on with her life, which she did. She considered investigating it further, getting an MRI, checking out this implant, but she decided not to. At one point, she did do something, a little experiment, out of curiosity. Her husband's father was a scientist, and he had this huge industrial magnet. And on impulse, she decided she would hold this magnet up to her ear where she believed this implant was. And this turned out to be a huge mistake. As Julia says, I felt this terrible, horrible, sharp pain deep inside my eardrum. It was so deep in there, and it felt like a needle just stabbing me in the ear. So I dropped the magnet, and I was hyperventilating from the pain. And she decided, okay, I'm not going to do that again. She did start to read about UFOs, not so much about people's experiences, but about the scientific aspects of her own experience. She did join a support group at one point and was shocked to see how similar her experiences were with other people. And finally, she did call her parents as well and told them everything. And to her surprise, her parents were very supportive and somewhat understanding, and actually revealed that they had both had their own sightings back in Prunedale. Fairly recently, in fact. They were followed down the road by UFOs. So this was comforting to Julia. Otherwise, she kept her experiences secret from everyone. And it was some years later, a few years later, after she had contacted me and given me an interview, and I'd written about her experiences, I called her up to let her know that the book was going to be coming out soon that contained her experiences, and I wanted her to look it over and make sure it was accurate. And I asked her if she had had any new experiences, and she said yes, she had a very unusual event. What she described was really quite amazing, something I'd only heard maybe once before. Julia decided to reach out telepathically to Sen again to see if she could talk to him. And she did not reach Sen, but she did reach what she believes to be the spirits of her deceased hybrid children, a lot of them. And this was really quite profound and poignant for her. As she says, I found myself open to whatever that connection is. I saw a great many faces coming through in rapid succession, all the children I had helped to create. It was such a hard thing to see from a human perspective, in that deformity in pregnancy can be devastating. Many of the faces were deformed. Some had my eyes and alien faces. Some had more human features and alien eyes. Most were dead. I knew they were dead, but with telepathic hive minds, the dead never really die. I was given a glimpse of my children, probably around 200, I would guess. It gave me the most sad feelings. I cried, and I just wanted to send my love to them, knowing that they had died and never had my love. It was like a funeral all at once for me. I had never thought of the failed experiments aspect of it, as you think there isn't room for failure in an advanced civilization that can do so much. But what they are trying to do is very difficult. I can't even grasp it sometimes. It's just really, really strange. So this was a very profound experience for her. She's not sure if this was just memories or if she was actually in active communication with these ET spirits. It was quite confusing to her. As she says, I did not speak to any of them. I just saw their many, many faces. I felt such a sadness and emotional connection, like a very deep mother's love. I did not feel like I was reaching out to spirits that could communicate, but just images. Or perhaps I did meet them and was able to give them love. That could explain the intense motherly connection I felt. Or maybe I experienced knowledge of their deaths, but all those memories were buried deep in my mind. It's very possible because I was only mentally awake and aware that one time I did meet a baby, and it really scares the crap out of me to think how much I have seen, experienced, and done, all to lose it to their advanced technology. So she cried and cried after this experience and was very sad to see so many of her children, her ET hybrid babies, who had passed away. In fact, it was so unnerving, she decided that was it. She was not going to reach out telepathically anymore. Julia is quite psychic. She is able to sense spirits as well, something she does not like because many of these earthbound spirits are quite negative, and she simply does not want to be a part of it. So she sort of has put this all on the back burner at this point and is just moving on with her life as a science writer and being with her husband and raising her 2 children. And she says they are very healthy, they are a wonderfully happy family, and ultimately she feels blessed to have all these experiences because it's really enlightened her to a much larger universe. As Julia says in closing, I think that is perhaps what we are all searching for, the perfect way to exist, with a mixture of connection and also the ability to disconnect completely and move through space and time. I have no idea how to do that, but it has something to do with the body and finding a way to access your astral body and still retain a connection to the physical body. Humans seem to be the perfect reboot for this, as we have the ability, just not the understanding. We are being used for this, but not using it completely ourselves. Maybe once we do, we will be able to join the rest of the universe in the search for this ultimate existence. So that's Julia's story. I did cover her story in my book, Wondrous, 25 True UFO Encounters. Julia's is one of the more extensive cases I have investigated, and I really wanted to share her story with you for a number of reasons. I think it really illustrates the ET agenda in detail. I think it shows how these experiences can start out very traumatic and move to a really interactive, positive relationship with ETs. Certainly this is how Julia feels. It's just a very interesting story. And it shows how ETs are also very interested in our emotions as well. So that seems to be one of the main ET agendas, is to repair their DNA and move back into a more emotional and physical realm of existence. So that is Julia's story. I hope you've enjoyed it. I want to thank you very much for watching. I truly appreciate it. And until next time, keep searching for answers, and most importantly, keep having fun.